Hello students, Mr. Young here. Welcome to Chapter 17, Lesson 4. It's called The Strain of War. So we're back to specifics today. We got some big battles, including perhaps the most famous of all Civil War battles right here in our home state, the Battle of Gettysburg. We'll talk about some problems the North and the South were facing a few years into the war now, as well as the famed African American regiment, the 54th Massachusetts. So, in the East, under the leadership of Generals Lee and Stonewall Jackson, the Confederacy continued to defend the Southern capital at Richmond, Virginia. So after the loss at Antietam, Lee moved his army back into Southern territory. The new Union commander, General Ambrose Burnside, took the initiative to drive once more on Richmond. Now Lee's forces, I've got a Lee around here somewhere. There he is. Lee's forces intercepted the Union army near Fredericksburg. Lee's men entrenched themselves in the hills, quite literally fighting from trenches they dug. So very well fortified positions on the high ground. If there's anything we learned from Star Wars, Revenge of the Sith, or our good friend Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's that you never attack the high ground. We all remember how that turned out for Anakin Skywalker, right? He ended up on fire with no arms and no legs. So that's pretty much how the battle ended up for General Burnside. Get it? There's fire, General Burnside, but that's really his name. The Union was defeated and suffered heavy losses. General Burnside was devastated and basically resigned in disgrace. All right, that leads us to Chancellorsville. It was Lee's next major engagement with Union forces, this time, however, under the command of General Joseph Hooker. Lee's army was outnumbered 2-1. He needed a good plan. Where is he? Here he is. And he had one. He split his forces in two, and while one main body engaged the numerically superior Union forces, the rest of them snuck around to the side and attacked the flank. The flank is generally in the military is considered your side. Flanking maneuver means you kind of sneak around to the side and attack the side of a formation. Generally a good move. You do not want to be flanked. This move worked, and Hooker's forces were forced to withdraw, but this came at a loss for the Confederacy. Stonewall Jackson was shot by friendly fire. During all that confusion of battle, flanking maneuvers, someone accidentally shot Stonewall Jackson. So between the wound and then he caught pneumonia, Stonewall Jackson died a week later, not gloriously on the field of battle, but of pneumonia and fratricide. So it was a big loss for the Confederacy. He was Lee's right-hand man, and it was very bad for morale. Now the Union had some management problems of their own. Lincoln had been through 3 generals already. He didn't think McClellan was aggressive enough. Burnside had resigned in disgrace. And now Hooker's getting his butt kicked up there in Chancellorsville. So the next guy up, new commander, 4th commander, General Meade, who took command of Union forces 3 days before the Battle of Gettysburg. So that brings us to African Americans in the war. I can paraphrase the South particularly well. The South was 30% slaves, and giving the slaves guns didn't seem like a good idea for the Confederacy. Remember that they were a bunch of slave-owning men that ran the Confederacy. They didn't want to arm their slaves, so they just never did it. The slaves, it wasn't even considered until the very end of the war, and by then it was too late. In the North, Abraham Lincoln didn't want to allow there to be African American regiments at first because he didn't want to make the border states mad at him. Remember, he was really into appeasing them for strategic reasons. But by 1862, it was apparent the North needed more men, and there were many African Americans willing to fight. By the end of the war, about 10% of the Union Army ended up being African Americans. Now, the South hated fighting these black units, and often unleashed hell upon them. They would fight them the hardest, concentrate fire on the African American regiments. There were some in the Union that doubted their fighting prowess, their mettle in battle. However, given the chance to prove themselves, black regiments proved their worth, such as the 54th Massachusetts. Now, the 54th had white officers, as did all black regiments in the Union, but it was primarily a black unit. The 54th became famous for their assault on Confederate Fort Wagner in South Carolina. Basically, they had to attack a fort, a very well fortified fortress. They suffered grueling losses, and they ultimately didn't take the fort. They were repelled, but they fought with such courage and sacrifice that, well, we're still talking about today. Very long odds, but they proved that they could fight. We have a cool video here on the 54th if you'd like to learn a little more. Now, the tide turns. In the spring of 1863, the Confederacy had the upper hand. They had defended the capital, once more, Chancellorsville, and it was time for them to impress Britain and France. Remember, they wanted their support so that they would pressure the Union into giving up. So Lee drove north. Where's my Lee? There he is. All the way into Pennsylvania. They were actually looking for supplies in Gettysburg when they pretty much were stumbled upon by Union forces. Day one was sort of skirmishy. The main bulk of the forces weren't ready there to fight, but the Union forces that were there were outnumbered and pretty much rolled back by the Confederacy to some high ground positions. On day two, all those reinforcements came, and the South is pretty much trying to dislodge Union forces from two hills, Round Top and Little Round Top. But to no avail. On day three, Confederate forces tried to break the Union lines with a now infamous charge led by General Pickett. It was called Pickett's Charge. They actually broke the first Union line, but they just had to go too far over too many obstacles, and the charge failed. It was like a 6,000-man charge. 3,000 of them were on the field, dead or dying. By the time they made it to the Union, by the time the charge was over, they just, imagine running across the field, getting shot at the whole time. That was Pickett's Charge. After this day three defeat, the Confederacy was forced essentially to retreat back into the South. Their plan to impress Britain and France didn't really work. Gettysburg is considered the turning point in the Civil War. I have this 4-minute video with some more specifics if you're into that. That brings us to Vicksburg. As they say, when it rains, it pours. On July 4th, 1863, the day after the Confederacy was defeated at Gettysburg, they lost one of their last strongholds on the mighty Mississippi River. Back in April, Union forces led by Grant had surrounded the city. Union forces numbered 77,000, and there were Navy gunboats on the river. They basically laid siege to the city, starving them out. They were running out of supplies and food. Despite this, not a lot of civilians died, so that's always good. Most of the casualties were confined to the armed forces. After 47 days, the Confederates were starved out. And a few days later, after Vicksburg was forced to surrender, the South lost Port Hudson, which was their very last stronghold on the Mississippi. So that Anaconda plan is sort of slowly coming to fruition. There's the blockade complete, Mississippi taken, complete. All that's left now for a Union victory is to take Richmond. Now that brings us to the Gettysburg Address. You see, there was a ceremony in Gettysburg some months after the battle. Remember, Gettysburg was July 1st through 3rd, and the Gettysburg Address is in November. So they were having a celebration, a ceremony, if you will, to dedicate a new national cemetery for all the soldiers who had died there. The man who spoke before Lincoln, a former governor, if I recall, had a 2-hour speech. Lincoln spoke for 2 minutes. He spoke of the sacrifice of the men who had died there in battle and his vision for the future of the United States. It initially received mixed reviews, but as you may well have determined, we're still talking about the Gettysburg Address. That's because history considers it to be one of the best speeches in American history. Feel free to see for yourself. It's all right here, as dictated by Jeff Daniels, an actor. And that's your lesson for the day. There's a lot of video supplement in there. This is your basic 10-point multiple choice quiz. And then tomorrow, we're getting into Lesson 5, the final stages of the war. That is what it's called, the war's final stages, and we'll see how it all ends. All right, hey, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, have a good day.